I had to pause there because I had to let you see the visual. What does this picture tell? What do you tell from? What can you tell from this picture? Someone feels, you could probably assume that the owner of this 1991 red Volvo feels pretty strongly about the concept of Christian self-government, right? That's my car. And another indication that I feel pretty strongly about Christian self-government is my latest book really is about Christian self-government. It's how Christian self-government is the answer to government taking all and becoming this, like an octopus, taking over, going way outside of its God-ordained jurisdiction and authority and usurping and taking the authority of the family, the church, schools, businesses, and voluntary associations. So this is a subject I'm pretty passionate about, and we as parents and teachers have to be pretty passionate about it as well, because it's vital to what we're doing. Thomas Jefferson said this: lay down true principles and adhere to them inflexibly. Do not be frightened into their surrender. And again, it was that generation thought in terms of inflexible principles, true principles that shouldn't be changed. And this is an example of that. This principle is one that we can't be flexible about. This one. This is a true principle. We got to hang on to it. Here's some examples of lack of self-control. I won't read those. You can read. We can say et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are just a few examples of lack of self-control that we see around us, and sometimes we see in us. I won't ask for any raising of hands here, but suppose I told you that I had developed a test of self-control or self-government. I have a test of that. How many of you would want to take it and have the results posted to social media? Certainly not I. Okay, so we're human beings, and we all deal with this area of self-government. So as we're working with the self-government of our children, let's remind ourselves that, they're children, and we're adults, and we've lived a lot longer than they have, and we're still dealing with self-government issues. I think one of the top 5 most important questions of all time is this question: how should man best be controlled or governed? The Quaker William Penn said those who are not governed by God will be ruled by tyrants. In other words, paraphrase, we could say, in principal approach language, we could say, we're either going to be governed by God, we're going to have evidence Christian self-government, or we're going to be governed by civil government. That would be the tyrant. So it's a choice. We're going to be governed, we're going to be controlled one way or another. If there was no government whatsoever, that would be what's referred to as anarchy, right? And no society could have anarchy for long. You can't have anarchy in your home or in your classroom. A society certainly can't have it. So we have to be controlled one way or another, either internally or externally. And how we're governed determines the degree of liberty that we have, or whether we have liberty or whether we have bondage. Liberty, I guess, is a little equation here. Liberty is self-government, submitting to the government of God in my life. And bondage is a lack of self-government. Now, the lie in our society has been around for a long time, not just in our society, but forever, is that liberty is freedom to do whatever we want. And when we do whatever we want, we are what? We're free. Actually, we're not. That's the worst bondage that there is, because that's the place that Satan wants to be at, because we're operating under his principles at that point instead of under God's principles. So, what does govern mean? When we use the word govern or government, what typical words come to mind? Control. Okay, I'm not thinking of the 1828. Maybe I'll back up here. Before we look at Webster, If you said the word govern or government to the average person, we just did a man on the street interview. Hey, what does government mean to you? What kind of feedback would you get? Yeah, president, Washington, D.C., laws, taxes, those type of things. And all that has to do with what? External government. We're not trained, we don't think in terms of internal anymore. But Webster said, govern is to direct and control as the actions or conduct of men, to keep within the limits prescribed by law or the sovereign will. Thus, in free states, men are governed by the Constitution and laws. In despotic states, men are governed by the edicts or commands of a monarch. Every man should govern well his own family. I think that's very interesting. I love Webster's one-word sermons, but he makes the point every man should govern well his own family. Goes on to control or to restrain, to keep in due subjection, as to govern the passions or the temper. To govern is direction, regulation. He said these precepts serve for the government of our conduct. Control or restraint. He said men are apt to neglect the government of their temper and passions. The exercise of authority by a parent or householder. Now there's a lot in this definition, right? We could spend a lot of time on it. We're going to look at a few things. But I want, I've already had a few things jumping out at me, words like temper and passions, and then parents and family. Okay, so you get an idea that's not about, we haven't heard anything about external government yet. Hardly. It's all internal. And then finally Webster says, children are often ruined by neglect of government in parents. Let family government be like that of our Heavenly Father, mild, gentle, and affectionate. So the first thing I did when I looked at this definition, I said, oh, T-chart, because I see cause and effect here. And the effect, and I see in this definition, or the external government, the words he uses are, he uses the family and he uses the word civil government, or refers to government being civil. For the internal, or that which is causative, he uses the words control, restraint, temper, which is disposition or of the mind or constitution of the mind. You got a governmental term right there. You know you had a constitution in your mind? We do. That's our internal government, that temper. And then passions. So we see here how the internal causes the other. And this is the central takeaway. This is when we want to make sure we understand, our children understand. This is the big idea. This is the leading idea, that internal or self-government determines or causes external government. And that external government can take varying forms. Family is external government. Family government. Church government. Our churches have a government. That's external. Civil government certainly is external. Those are all external governments. But those are all, if we look at those governments, they all are a reflection of internal government of those that are involved in those entities, whether it's the family, the church, or civil government. Self-government. As I looked at this definition, I realized that just as there's internal and external for government, there's actually an internal and external aspect of self-government. We must properly govern our internal property, our passions, or our temper. Webster says we have to control our passions and our temper in order to manifest good actions and behavior. So, listen to what we say to our children. Watch your attitude. You should not think that way. Or control yourself. Control your passions. Often those external manifestations that are negative, they have an internal, something in the passions or temperament that we need to work on. We need to point out to them. We need to help them realize that that's an aspect of their self-government. So, We all know that we have a big issue with self-government in our society. What's the solutions? Politicians? More laws? A Christian president? Certainly that's the answer. I remember back in my first presidential election, it's going to be Jimmy Carter, the born-again president. And I was a new Christian, and I was so naive. I was like, oh, if we could just get a Christian, this man is born again, and we can just get a Christian president in the White House, that'll solve all of our nation's ills. Boy, was I naive. Even, well, if we just get back to the Constitution, and I believe in the Constitution, don't get me wrong. If we can just get back to the Constitution, that'll solve our problems in this nation. Well, let's look at a few scriptures now. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. Ruling our spirit, being self-governed. He that has no rule over his own spirit is like a city that's broken down without walls. Now, back in the day when this was written, you think of Jerusalem with the walls broken down. What did it mean? The walls were important, very important defenses, right? Against enemies, against wild animals, all kinds of things. So a city broken down without walls was very, very serious situation. So a child or us, if we have no rule over our own spirit, not self-governed. And then Proverbs 6:6, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. So this lowly ant that we just will step on, right, and not even realize it's there, God says is an example. Notice, no guide, overseer, or ruler. Three different terms for external rulers or external governors. Doesn't have these external governors, and yet they do what they're supposed to. Okay. Now, of course, and the analogy breaks down and they're doing it because of instinct. We have a will and a choice, but God is using that to teach us the principle of Christian self-government. Paul said, all things are lawful unto me, but not all things are expedient. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. In the Greek, expedient means not all things profit. So I get up and get ready to have breakfast in the morning at the hotel there. I noticed the donuts. Now, they're not unlawful, but having just read the scripture, I'm thinking to myself, they're not unlawful, but are they profitable to me? Are they expedient? And I passed the test. No, they're not. They weren't expedient or profitable, so I passed them up, and I had a yogurt. One of the techniques, as I've looked at this principle, I think is a very, very important principle that Paul's laying down here. One of the things that I did with my 4 children is often your children would say to you when they want to do something and mom or dad says no, what the pushback that you get is, Dad, what's wrong with such and such? Fill in the blank, right? I mean, we've all heard that. What's wrong with such and such? So somewhere along the line, reading and understanding this principle, I developed this comeback to them. Well, I would like to ask you what's right with such and such. And after a while, it became, oh, Dad, do I have to give you a treatise on why this thing is right and good? And sometimes they wanted to do something I didn't want them to do at first, and they actually came back and they gave a good defense for it or put a good motive on what they wanted to do. But it's not necessarily what's wrong with something, but what's right with it. I want to look at 1 Corinthians 9. Therefore I run thus not with uncertainty, thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself should become disqualified. And I get the sense, Paul, who was just, one of the greats. But look at this. He has this sense that if he doesn't practice Christian self-government, that even though he's preached to others, he could become disqualified. And I look at this and think, wow, disciplining our body. I got up this morning. How many of you exercise like when you first get up in the morning? That's when I exercise. And is it hard? You're by yourself first thing in the morning? Some people say, it's so hard to quit things. I said, no, it's not. The easiest thing to quit is exercise. But we have to discipline our bodies, right? And it just doesn't stop. We must discipline ourselves. We must be self-governed. The story is told of this man one year that was sharing his New Year's resolutions with his wife. And he says, well, my resolutions this year are to not exercise, eat more junk food, and gain 30 pounds. And his wife, of course, was aghast. He says, well, why do you want to do that? He says, well, I finally want to have resolutions that I can keep. It's a common thing that we all deal with. So one of the questions that we ask in Principal Approach Education, you see this in the red books and so forth, and this idea of thinking governmentally is, who or what is in control? So I've got some wrong things up there: Satan, peer pressure, negative emotions like anger, fear, worry, greed, lust. Those are all wrong things that we want to be in control. What we want to be in control is God. Self-government is really not the whole term. It's kind of an abbreviation for God's government in our lives, the government of God in our lives. So we want God to be in control. We want, to have a submitted heart, to have a tender conscience that's obedient to His Spirit and to His Word. This is the essence of Christian self-government. So we've looked at individual self-government. I want to briefly take a look at the next sphere, which would be self-government in the home. And as Rosalie has pointed out, this is one of the main priorities of the home and of parents, to train character in Christian self-government. So Webster said in his definition, you might have noticed this, every man should govern well his own family. Then he said, children are often ruined by a neglect of government and parents. So do you think there's a typo in this slide? Should it say children are often ruined by neglect of government by parents? Because doesn't Webster want to tell us that parents are not governing their children? Or do you think it's purposeful that he put in? Why did he use that word in? Because again, just as we model character, we model Christian self-government. So one of the applications there is that we discipline without anger. And we'll talk a little bit about more later at the end about some unbiblical forms of discipline, but this would be one of them. A loss of control or a loss of self-government in a parent or a teacher is not a good thing. I'm sure in your school you don't allow teachers to yell at the students, right? Not a good thing. Why? Because it's okay to be angry. There are times to be angry, and there are times that we will be angry with our children, and they'll be angry with us. The Bible says, be angry and sin not. Okay, so not all anger is wrong, but anger where we allow ourselves to lose control of ourselves, where it becomes uncontrollable, that's wrong. We're trying to get them to control themselves, and we're not controlling ourselves, so we're not being that right model. At the beginning of TNL, the very front of TNL, there is a reprint of a sermon by a Reverend Phillips from 1859, and this is a couple of quotes from that. That is a great, by the way, that's a great resource for teachers and parents, that little sermon. Just all kinds of nuggets of wisdom and child training in that one little sermon in the front of TNL. So this is what Phillips said. Home is a little commonwealth jointly governed by the parents. Home is a government. It's a commonwealth. It involves law. The mutual relation of parent and child implies authority on the one hand and obedience on the other. And all the parents said, amen, right? Authority, you have the authority, and they are to obey. This is the principle of all government. Phillips said, home is the first form of society. As such, it must have government. Its institution implies the prerogatives of the parent and the subordination of the child. Prerogatives are exclusive privileges. You have privileges as a parent that the child doesn't have. So again, prerogatives of the parents and subordination of the child. And all the parents said, amen. And all the teachers said, amen. Okay, because you're standing in loco parentis. You're in the place of the parent in that classroom. So all this applies to the teacher in the classroom as well. Without this, there would be no order, no harmony, no training for the state or the church. So think about it. This is a key concept. And the state and the church, they have a huge impact. The church today, pastors ought to be preaching this. And civil authorities ought to be, in every way they can, encouraging parents and teachers to train students in self-government. Because if you're not self-governed at this level, you're not going to manifest it in those other institutions. And bosses, owners of companies, they should be concerned about it too, because we need self-government evidence in the workplace as well. This quote we looked at yesterday, actually, Carol, or maybe I had this in my presentation, a quote by Adams. So I'm not going to take the time to read through this, but again, just this emphasizes that self-government is not something that's natural, it's an art. We need to train our children in the art of Christian self-government. All right, quickly look at an application of this, go from the family to the church, volunteer associations, and civil governments. This just very briefly to show you how this plays out in all the spheres of authority. Vernal Hall had this to say: each religion has a form of government. And Christianity astonished the world by establishing self-government. Why was that so astonishing? Because we had not had that form of government since the Hebrew Republic, since God had given that form of government to the nation of Israel. Yes, there had been bits and pieces of it up through the ages, but a nation that was fully dependent upon self-government, a republican form of government, it was unique. With the landing of the Pilgrims in 1620, Christian self-government became the foundation stone of the United States of America. It's well documented in America that the way this came about was that we had it in the individuals, we had it in the families, self-government, that is, we had it in our churches, and these covenants that we had in our family and our churches were transmuted into civil covenants. It's well documented if you've not seen that. Edmund Burke, so now applying self-government to the civil sphere, taking it all the way up to all the spheres. Edmund Burke said this: men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their own appetites, in proportion as their love of justice is above their rapidity, hasten speaking, in proportion as their soundness and sobriety of understanding is above their vanity and presumption, in proportion as they are disposed to listen to the counsels of the wise and good, in preference to the flattery of knaves. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions form their fetters. So in other words, we have to be governed internally unless we want fetters, right? Unless we want to be bound by the chains of some form of external government. This is how our founders thought. I'm going to skip the Carol actually read this yesterday. Winthrop said the same thing, and I won't skip it. I'll just, without reading it, I highlighted the words that I think that we want to be governed by. Individual self-government, private moral restraint, a power within us. Winthrop said the Word of God, the Bible, and finally, it's religion which must support the state. Okay, so applications. I want to make sure that we get to these because I've got a lot to go through, but I want to talk about the practical application of these big concepts. So, class or home constitution. I know you have, I've seen in your notebooks, you have class constitutions in your school. That is a wonderful thing, and I love the story that Carol has about putting that class constitution together with her 4th or 5th grade class. And I think that as you use your classroom constitutions every year, it's important that they just not become some rote thing. Okay, well, here's our classroom constitution. Everybody sign it. Every year you try to do something so that they understand the whole concept, that the classroom is governed by law, just not the whim of the teacher, that we have a written constitution, that you consent to it. At Stonebridge, in our middle school, we actually, September 17th is Constitution Day. It's one of the holidays that I talk about in my book. It's Constitution Day, the day the Constitution was finally passed. So at Stonebridge, they celebrate Constitution Day every year, and it's a middle school event, and they have a play and everything about it, and then they have the constitutions up on a table, and the students make a big deal about. They come up because they're like the Constitutional Convention, and they're signing the Constitution, saying, I pledge myself to this. So that's only done by a couple of grades, but that's an idea of a kind of thing that you could do to make this a good teaching tool. Anybody ever thought of the idea of a home constitution? Anybody have a home constitution? My wife and I wrote, based upon our learning of this, we wrote a home constitution. And we said that this is the Lyons family, and this is how we will govern ourselves. And it's a couple pages long. And our children knew that, wasn't mom and dad just ripping off whatever we had thought of that day. This was the rule one day, another day it's another rule. We have, our family was governed under law. Yes?
I just had this thought, I wonder if it's true, that right in the thing that said that men in the world must necessarily, anyway, the idea that if we govern ourselves, then we don't have to have so many laws. And I was thinking, so that the opposite is true. Does it show that we are basically not governing ourselves because we have to have so many laws in place? We're not morally taking care of ourselves? Is that it's kind of like a symbol? Oh, look, this is how fallen we are. Because I think a lot of people say, well, what about the children? They'll suffer if we don't have all these rules to protect the children. So what do we do?
Someone said, and maybe you can help me with a reference on this. Maybe you know this one, Grant. If we will not, a people that will not be governed by the 10 commandments will not be governed by the 10,000 commandments. You heard that one?
But that's kind of what we're trying to do, is just make it so that we can be protected instead of.
Well, I think Carol might have said something yesterday about the gridlock. People talk about gridlock in Congress and they're not passing laws. I'm like, hallelujah, because almost every law they pass is not good. Now, if they were passing laws to repeal bad things, I'd be happy about that, but that's not happening. The Federal Register is 80,000 pages now or something like that. The proliferation of law is an example of the fact that internal law is breaking down. Absolutely. So I totally agree with you on that one. And Carol gave a good example in the classroom. They had all those laws, on the board, and she says, can we just simplify this? We've got all these laws, and we can, and she brought it down to a few basic principles. I'm sure protection of property, private property, how we act toward one another, kindness toward one another, not distracting. Part of kindness would be not distracting people, from the learning process. I'm convinced that you could probably 3 rules are really all you need in the classroom. That 3 general rules or laws would pretty much cover everything. If we're consenting to be self-governed and under God's government. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. Totally lost the basis behind the laws. We still have our Constitution today, thank God, right? We're federal as well as states, and if you look, there's a lot of stuff is still in place. I mean, there's things that have been changed by amendments, but the basic structure that our founders set up is still there, and yet what? We either forgotten it, or we've ignored it, or we think that in our minds it's evolved to something else. Good point. We need some law. Absolutely. We need boundaries. And we need some law. It's just a matter of how much. The more we have of internal, the less we'll have to have of external. Will we ever, the Bible doesn't advocate being anarchist. It doesn't advocate saying there should be no government. That's not a biblical concept. Okay? But it is to be limited. Yes.
I think a lot of our behavior in our culture today is self-centered rather than self-governed. And I think we have a very good example of that with the new law that was just passed last week about texting in our cars. And that's just simply not caring about our other people around us. And I think a lot of our laws are coming about because of that selfishness.
Trying to protect others from our selfish nature. That's a good point. I'm going to go ahead and put a few of these others up here, and we can keep talking and keep reflecting on these. Training and obedience. I know it sounds basic, but we've got parents today that this whole part about, I'm the authority, you're to be in obedience to me, that concept has been challenged in our culture today. One of the saddest things, I was the primary school principal at Stonebridge at one point, and I did one time have to expel a student because he did not understand that he was to be in obedience to the teacher. The teacher's authority, he had to do what the teacher said. And when I brought his parents in to confront this and try to work through it, I quickly realized where he got it from, because his parents didn't treat him like, I'm the authority and you must obey. They were treating him kind of like an equal, and that I have to persuade to do things or something like that. So I had to, first time I ever expelled a kindergartner, but it was because of that basic concept. We can't work together if we don't have that in common. Don't just tell me to obey, but teach the why behind every rule. Okay, I've got a power source question here. Okay, the why behind our rules. Our children need to know that, right? Don't just do what I say because I say it. Okay, and we as principal approach educators, we want to give the students the basis for those rules and those laws. Give children the choice to be self-governed. If they're not, there are consequences. You have to be careful about the force or the pressure that we use to make students do what they want, because this whole idea of consent is important. Now, I'm not saying you take individual examples. You can't take this to extreme. I'm going to let my child do anything, and I'll just let him suffer the consequences of it. No, I'm not. That would be an extreme. But and teaching them to become self-governed, sometimes they're going to make choices that are the wrong choices, right? And how are we to respond to that? We need to let them suffer the consequences of lack of self-government. You've probably seen parents that, bail out their children, okay? Keep them from the suffering the negative consequences because of their lack of character or lack of self-government or lack of planning, whatever. That's not good parental training, is it? And finally, teach self-government. And when you're doing that in your school, but purposely teach it to them, okay? Don't assume that they know it. Look for examples of Christian self-government or lack thereof, and make sure that students learn it. And they can. It's not a hard concept. What was that example that we heard about that child that learned it very quickly and said it to their mother? And we can see these things when we're teaching self-government. We can see that in our curriculum. Make sure as we're going through our curriculum that we point out examples of self-government and also negative examples, because we can learn from the negative examples as much as we can from the positive examples. Oh, there's someone that wasn't self-governed, and look what happened to them. What happened to them? What consequence did they have? Was that a good thing? No, it wasn't so good. Why not? Because they weren't self-governed. A written constitution. We've already talked about that one. In a written constitution, these are some points on a written constitution. When you have a written constitution, whether it's in your home or in a classroom, you can even do this in a business. Often you see this in a business. These are the rules of the business. They don't call it a constitution, but this is how this business operates. This is what we will all be under. We see that children and the teacher are both under the law. The students need to see that you're not the benevolent dictator of your classroom, right? You're under the law too. And they need to know that you're not only under the law of the Constitution, but you're under the law of the school. You have to answer to the administration and the policies that the board has put together. You are under law. In a constitution, they need to consent to the government of God and the government of the classroom. They need to consent to that document. How many of you, did any of you as teachers post the Constitution on the wall, where if the student, if the student misbehaves, take them to the Constitution and have them read the portion? Would anybody like to share an example of that or what you do?
Julie does.
Okay. Someone volunteer, Julie.
She just told us. It's really cute. That's why.
We have a self-government party in our class
Oh.
because I've had a lot of their siblings, and a lot of these families look so much alike. Every child looks like a cookie cutter. And when I call them by the wrong name, like I do my own children at home, I have to put a quarter in the jar. And when the jar gets to about $5 or $6, we have a self-government party. And the teacher has to sit at the back table and do work while they have their party. So that way they know I'm not perfect either. I mean, we all make mistakes.
Yes.
But that's their self-government group.
I like that. There's so much creativity, isn't it? Teaching can be really fun. I mean, it's hard, but there's some really, I love these creative elements. And, the students love these things too. Sameness can be deadening, but having a new teacher with creative ideas under the same principles, that's great. So use that Constitution. Don't just file it away, but use it and say, this is our document that we're under. If we're going to disregard it, we need to change it. We can't just disregard it. It could be amended. If you find out that your Constitution needs to be amended, it can be, but it shouldn't just be neglected. And I lost my. I think I might have lost my battery power here. All right, so let's do a buzz at this point. That'd be a good break. And the question is this, and I'll let you get in your little groups for just a couple minutes. Why is Christian self-government vitally important, and how do I develop it? how do I further development in myself and my children? All right, I'll say it again. Why is Christian self-government vitally important? And how do I further development in myself and my children? What ideas do I have where I can implement some new things possibly? Okay, go ahead and stand up and give you a couple minutes for buzz. Okay, any comments on our last question? Someone give you a good idea? Someone share an idea with you? Isn't it great how you get good stuff from other people? We're working on our PowerPoint here. Yes.
At his children. And my daughter, when she was young, she didn't want to go to this uncle's house because he was always yelling at his children. And she would say, let's not go there. Do we have to go there? And so it kind of put a strain on the relationship between our families because she didn't like Uncle so-and-so, and we had to talk to her about, well, why don't you like him? And, what's wrong? And he yells at us. And she didn't like that, and I don't blame her. I don't like being yelled at either. So, it's really, it really affects the feelings between family members and the unity in the home.
Yes. Okay, anyone else? Yes.
Well, it comes back to most problems in the world begin with us. And I don't feel like I can expect my students to be self-governed if I'm not.
Yes.
So you set the standard, and when we do our classroom constitution, I have to set up my classroom expectations.
And so when we talk about what do we expect in the art room, do we expect to leave it clean? Do we have the stewardship time? And that's where we start our constitution. But it really starts with me, and when I can tell the weeks that I'm a little, not caught up and not organized, it really reflects on them. And they rise to that occasion just as well as when I'm an organized person.
Yes, one of my memories of high school, I don't have too many, but I do remember the classroom classroom management techniques of some of the teachers. And ironically, my government teacher was the one that I remember how he governed his classroom. And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm going to talk about unbiblical methods of classroom government. So hold that thought. I'll finish that story in just a minute and tell you what he did. Okay, let's look at this quote by Rosalie on classroom government, and then we'll look at unbiblical methods of classroom government, and then we'll be done. Rosalie said this: one of the first concerns of the teacher is classroom control. When this is established, the teacher can perform successfully as a teacher. When classroom control is not achieved, the teacher becomes a policeman, imposing harsh measures of discipline to counteract inconsistency, laxness, or poor classroom management. In the absence of a good classroom government, the teacher also becomes a fireman, sirening about to handle small fires of insurrection or helplessly fanning flagrant conflagrations of disobedience. Oh, flowery language there. The Christian educator has a tremendous responsibility in the areas of classroom government, for the secularism of the times has invaded the first area of parental authority, the home. In teachers' colleges, the influence of the behavioral fields of psychology, anthropology, sociology have promoted methods of classroom control, which put the criteria for judgment of action in society. This becomes socialism. The Christian educator needs to teach students first that the source of all authority, law, and government are found in God and defined in His Word. Second, that Christian self-government makes God's law the requirement of the heart, internal. And this is the basis of our American Christian Constitution. great quote on classroom government. So what are some of the unbiblical methods of government? Wish I'd put these up there one at a time, but don't read ahead. Be self-governed. We're looking at one at a time. First one is fear or intimidation. I wrote, it's proper to have a healthy fear of governing authorities. That's what Romans 13:3 says. However, controlling by fear or intimidation, my government teacher, again it said ironically, the government teacher governing this way, this is how he governed. When you walked into the room, he was sitting in his desk, and literally he was looking at you, and he was, scowling at you. And so you went over and you sat down very timidly in your desk, and you behaved yourself because you didn't want to find out what he would do if you did or said something wrong. That's how he governed his classroom, through fear and intimidation. And we were all good, but did we like government? My goodness, that was like the worst class ever. And now my favorite subject is government, but it wasn't because of my government teacher. I'm not sure I learned anything that year except just get the work done and get out of there and don't get your head bit off. Anger, again, we've talked about this already. All anger is not wrong. There's sometimes it's appropriate to be angry, and sometimes it's appropriate for your students to be angry. But we got to teach ourselves as well as our students to be angry but sin not. Okay? So sometimes it's a teachable moment when you're angry or one of them is angry, and you got to figure out how to deal with that anger biblically. Usually the yelling comes from the parent that yells at his children all the time. It's anger. It's just uncontrolled anger. It's coming out in the form of verbal abuse. Threats. Reminding a child of the potential consequences of his attitudes, his words, or actions is proper. Okay? So saying that if you do such and such, you sow this, you're going to reap that, that's not necessarily a threat. But it can cross over into a threat. If you don't do such and such, then I'm going to do this. That's a threat. So that's appealing to the fear of negative consequences rather than appealing to the good that they could be choosing, not a biblical method of classroom management. We should be teaching our students that it's right to do right because God says it, right? Because it's the right thing to do. It's biblical. God says it. It's the thing that's required to love God or to love your fellow man. Okay? Not threatening them. Punishing the group. Now, this is a messy one because I've seen teachers do this and try to justify it. But I think that, written here, I think this method of control is consistent with the philosophy of socialism, not Christianity, which emphasizes the individual rather than the group. Deuteronomy 24:16 says, fathers should not be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their fathers. Persons shall be put to death for their own sins. And we're not obviously talking about the death penalty here, but the principle is that you're responsible for your own actions. So what do you do? And I've been in this situation before. I've been in this situation as a disciplinarian of this school, meting out discipline. You got two students, or you got a classroom where someone's done something wrong, and you can't find out who it is. You know something happened. Maybe it happened when your back was turned. Maybe it happened, I don't know what the circumstances are, but you can't get to the root of it, okay? Or even, I've had two students in my office, one against the other. I've talked to them both. They both have their stories, which are contradictory. Sometimes I've pulled in witnesses. I've tried to get confessions, and I end up with a stalemate. So what do? Do I punish both of them? If it's a class, do I punish the whole class? I come to the conclusion biblically that it would be wrong to punish both of them or wrong to punish the whole class. Because yes, I am punishing an evildoer, but I'm also punishing people who have done nothing wrong, which is a great injustice. And the students justifiably will feel very much violated. And so, is it worth having that injustice against someone who's innocent to punish someone who's guilty? No. The Bible is clear that, and life experience is clear. Are we punished for everything that we ever do wrong? If I got a speeding ticket for every time I've ever sped, I don't think I've ever gotten a speeding ticket. That's amazing to me. But does God, every time we do something wrong, does he mete out a punishment to us? No, he doesn't. So why would we feel like we have to do that for our students? Better that one guilty student go free, if you're not able to determine their guilt, than for the innocent to be punished. Yes?
I just have a question on how do you feel then about like group projects? When you put kids together and there's some kid in the group that's ruining it for everyone else, how would you work through something like that?
Okay, well, yeah, it is common in this whole, what do they call it, cooperative learning and everything. Now, this is just my opinion. Maybe you love it and you might do it and it's maybe great for you. Personally, I don't like it and I don't do it. I didn't like it when I was in school because I was always the one that did all the work and then somebody else who was lazy got some of the credit. And I understand the purpose in doing things, you know, in a group, and I do have learning activities where they have to work together, but to have like one project and everybody gets the same grade, I don't like it. I didn't do it. So again, that's my opinion. Yeah.
You can design a rubric where a major portion of it is an individual grade, so they're working in a group.
There you go.
They can do the group project, but there are a lot of things you can put in this rubric that they themselves have to learn.
Great idea.
You can also have an individual assessment of each other and then turn that in. There's a lot of
Okay.
things that are
Okay. Good idea. So maybe I need to try that. Maybe I need to be more open to that method because I know there's some benefits for it. Do you have one?
So my question, you were talking about maybe you have the two in your office. How do you then move forward from that? You've decided I can't punish both of them. I won't find out the truth. I'm not going to, we're in an impasse. How do you, what would be your steps to now, it's not saving face, but say, okay.
No, I'd simply if it's two students, and I would just tell them straight up when I'm telling you all, I have not been able to get to the bottom of this. I know that one of you is telling the truth and one of you is lying. That's got to be what's going on here, but I don't know which is which. So then at that point I'm going to appeal to their conscience. I'm going to say nothing is hid from God, and I need you at some point. Start to talk to them about the importance of their conscience and of they need to get rid of this burden. And then I'll just pray with them and let them go. And sometimes something will come back where there'll be a confession or a revelation and something will be resolved later on. Sometimes nothing happens. But that's okay. That's okay. I did what I was responsible to do, and wasn't able to resolve. You can't resolve everything. Yeah, cut the baby in half. Good idea. Not Solomon. But yeah, the majority of them are acting up. I've had situations where I think I was telling somebody at lunch or something that this one class that was challenging me so much, I finally, at one time, I remember I sat down and I said, "Look, you all are not letting me teach, so I'm not going to teach anymore. But the class needs to go on because this is the lesson." So I said, "The ball's in your court now, because I can't do what I'm supposed to do." And I just sat down. And of course, this was an example. It wasn't everybody, and so in a sense, everybody was having to have the consequence of not having a teacher. But I just had to do that because of the situation. So yeah, but I think you have to be very careful because of this idea of, children, especially teenagers, they're very, very, very sensitive, as they should be, to being punished if they haven't done something wrong. So I take that very seriously, and I just in no way ever wanted to punish a student who I couldn't prove. I didn't even have a witness or a confession or something could prove that they had done something wrong.
Well, and I think that get to the bottom of it if you can, but err on the side of grace and forgiveness and kindness. I had a student several years ago that kept stealing things from people, and of course, at 5 and 6 and 7 years old, they don't really, anyway. And long story short, I found out later, much later, closer to the end of the year, that the reason why she was taking these things, she had been adopted, and for some reason just couldn't connect with her family or wasn't connecting with people, and all these little things that she was taking was her way of keeping a piece of them with her so she felt connected to something. And so it's always err on the side of kindness, because it's better to, and sometimes the kindness will even make them come clean because they feel really bad.
It's a good point, and you have to also be very careful about motives, right? Because we don't know what's in the heart. Sometimes we see a behavior, but I remember my son one time was opening and closing the refrigerator door, and to the extent that my wife got so mad, Christopher, you get away from that. What are you doing? Just was really mad at him. And then she came to find out that, I don't know how old he was, 3 or 4, but he was realizing that when the door opened, the light came on, and when it shut, and he was trying to figure out what was doing that. So he wasn't misbehaving, and yet it looked like that. So we have to be very careful about the heart, because the heart is God's jurisdiction. The actions are our jurisdiction. We can look at actions and we can judge whether they're good or bad, but motives, we often can't see the heart, and sometimes we make the mistake of trying to judge the motives or assume the motives when we don't know. Now the student can tell you why they did something. In that case, they did, and now you know the motive, and you can judge whether the motive was good or in line with Scripture or not. So I am out of time, and I want to turn it over to Grant, and I want to thank you so much for this time here and for your patience and your participation. God bless you. For your fellow Christian educators.
Right.
We're all in this together, right?
Max, thank you for coming so far, for spending 2 full days with us and being here. I am going to ask this question of you as we get to just some wrap-up here, but I want to tell you that I've been thinking about this right here for quite some time. And this concept of being able to, in the principal approach, what is the principal approach? Bring it all down to one thing. And for me, it's so much about telling the stories of our personal lives that actually cause our students to give us that consent and involuntary attention. And I'm going to be taking this, and I'm going to be writing a story from my own personal life on each one of these, both the principle that we're wanting to teach, as well as the anti-principle that our behavior sometimes has fallen into. My own children, my own students in my class, they're just rapt when I tell a story from my personal life. And so thank you, this touched me. Let's give Dr. Lyons one more big round of applause. And do you have any last questions for him before I ask some questions of you? Okay, right there, Cynthia.
Yeah, we never got into that. Behavior modification, is that, that was big when my wife went through her elementary education program back in the 80s. That was a big thing in terms of classroom management, behavior modification. I don't know. I don't even know today if is that still a big thing taught in colleges today? Special education. Yeah, but the whole idea is that it really is moving away from this whole authority. Again, it's back to Hegel, authority and subordinate. No, there's this kind of this mushy middle, you're not really the authority. I mean, yes, you are, but in order to get the students to behave, you got to use this psychology. You got to try to get them to do, the essence of it is trying to get them to do what you want them to do without them realizing that you're the authority and you're making them do it. So it really, in my view, it's based upon deception and trying to go around the mind and reflection of the child, the consent of the child. So, yeah, I mean, if you've had that training in behavior modification, you don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you haven't had that before, and I don't think we tend to do that in our Christian classrooms. We have policies in place that we can't govern in that manner, but